Hello, I'm Orkhan Amashov. Welcome to Headlines. President Donald Trump's inauguration speech has, amongst other things, re-emphasized his well-known skepticism towards climate change. America will be a manufacturing nation again, said the 47th President of the United States, adding that his country is going to make the best use of its oil and gas resources and increase American export and also end the new Green Deal. It's also very clear that as one of Trump's America First priorities, the new administration will repeat his first-term action of pulling the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement. China, on the other hand, in particular bearing in mind its increasing renewable green credentials, appears to be well positioned to benefit from this situation. According to the International Energy Agency, Beijing is expected to account for almost 60% of all renewable energy capacity installed worldwide between now and 2030. And joining me now to discuss the wide range of issues related to U.S. foreign policy, U.S.-China confrontation, Mr. Richard Spooner, the member of the advisory board of the Washington-based Caspian Policy Center, and also Melih Demirtaş, independent researcher and former Turkish diplomat. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Mr. Spooner, my first question is going to be addressed to you. Before moving into the realm of climate change and the energy-related matters, what general conclusions have you drawn from Trump's inauguration speech in the context of US-China confrontation?
Well, I would say the first thing that comes to mind is that President Trump has made it clear that he wants to institute tariffs, particularly with respect to China. And that, of course, is going to be immediately a point of contention with the Chinese government. So the confrontation that you're talking about seems to be, unfortunately, right on track.
Thank you. This was very brief and answer based on the crux of your conclusion. Thank you very much. Mr. Demirtaş, also please, could we hear your reflections on that speech? I mean, many people would say that it was a fine piece of self-aggrandizement. It was completely centered around the notion that America is a great nation. It is bound to be even greater. In terms of your research area, of course, you're dealing with Middle East and other areas of Eurasian continent. What are your general conclusions on the basis of that inaugural speech?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Amashov. This is, yes, an historical speech, I think. And it reminds me also some historical elements are there. Because America is back is the main slogan, as we all see in the official website and also in Mr. Trump's speech. And I compare it maybe if you remember Mr. Putin's, with references to historical pages of Russian Empire, Soviet Union, and of course Russian Federation's first years. I think Mr. Trump's speech has also reminded me somehow the years of America, which is arises from its maybe this wild west area, which is so rich with the petroleum, with the richer continents, with the new initiatives of new members of the society. And now Mr. Trump suddenly, and maybe he openly declares that he will, bring maybe this spirit back to America. Because the Green, I think, deal is for him like the rights of LGBT people, and the other things are like so postmodern, as we can say. Because Mr. Trump maybe is another kind of postmodern leader in my readings, but still, if you can see the deal with him, I think with the other groups in the trade unions and the trade people and tech giants, of course, we can say that Mr. Trump's always opening the doors for many actors. And I think China is also one of these actors. Mr. Spooner is right that there could be some confrontation, but also there are so many, open doors with the Mr. Trump's new regime, I can say. He even said that Mr. Jinping, this Chinese leader is a great leader, fantastic leader, and maybe he gives signals for, I don't know, for future alignments, with future alliances, even some good speeches to North Korean leader. We can remember it with his own style of talking with the press members. So in the Green Deal and also in this renewable energy things, we must, I think, wait for a little bit. He promises that he will sign, I think, most important documents in 1 or 2 hours, and he did so. But I think in the next step, we must wait what these diplomatic acts will bring in the next step.
Thank you, Mr. Demirtas. Mr. Spooner, what Trump said there in that inauguration speech, he said that America is going to reclaim its sovereignty. It's going to expand its territory. He mentioned about different Panama Canal and some other elements. He didn't mention anything about Ukraine. He said that US it would be a great honor to be a peacemaker and unify and so forth. And many people would say that the United States is going to behave in a less interventionist way in different parts of the world. Could you, in a nutshell, and bearing in mind that your answers tend to be quite brief, I'm sure there will be no problem in terms of providing an answer in a very nutshell, in a very concise form, in a nutshell to explain the fundamental tenets of US foreign policy in a very condensed form under the second Trump administration, the way you envision it? I mean, do you believe it will be?
Well, in the United States, if you talk to foreign relations specialists, you talk to State Department people, former ambassadors, they always stress the continuity issue about how, regardless of whether it's the Republicans replacing the Democrats or Democrats replacing Republicans, there's a certain continuity, a certain recognition of commitments already made and policies that are accepted and being implemented. I don't think that President Trump necessarily is going to follow that tradition. At the same time, I do believe that in his second campaign, in his inaugural address, and in general, he seems to have learned some things from his first term. He seems to think more now about perhaps his legacy, perhaps it's also part of getting things done, but he doesn't seem to be quite as controversial. Now, obviously, when he talks about the Panama Canal and Greenland, that's going to be very controversial. And it may turn out that those are statements really just directed at the domestic audience, to those people who like to hear the talk, as my esteemed colleague said, about America being great again, going back to some past glory, which I personally don't see as terribly realistic. And one other thing about the issue of the confrontation with China. As you said, I think very correctly, there are opportunities to do business with Mr. Trump, especially because he's very transactional oriented. And so if there are ways that he and President Xi can talk calmly about what each of them needs the most, perhaps there's a way that they can come to some sort of understanding and avoid a very difficult confrontation over Chinese exports to the US, let's say.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Demirtas, Mr. Spooner mentioned about continuity, about that realities that administrations may change, but certain fundamental sort of linchpins of foreign policy are not going to change. Do you expect continuity in that geography, Middle East, in relation to which you are you're a man of great knowledge and expertise?
Thank you. Yes, the continuities are, they're liked. They are preferred by diplomats because continuities are having less risks. Of course, there are some advantageous positions of diplomats when they're having time to think about the, status quo, and they like status quo. I think many diplomats, whether they are Turkish, whether they are Russian or American, we know that. But the problem is that Mr. Trump somehow said that there could be some changes, some maybe radical changes compared to the past, Democratic Party's rule in America and the United States. He changed, I think, the mind of the community, I think also. Because the Democrat Party, yes, we know that. There is the internet age, digital age, the rise of the young ideology. They are all, of course, the crisis of COVID. And the people wanted to be much more free and much more freedom they wanted to have in this Democratic Party's rule. But now, maybe after such a maybe free world, unfortunately, we saw catastrophic and of course, very devastating events in many parts of the world, and first of all, in the near abroad of Russia and in the near abroad of Turkey also. We have seen in Ukraine and still in Gaza, unfortunately, even there are ceasefire there are parties that really promise to not take any harsh actions. Unfortunately, we saw again some, seeds from the international media. And Mr. Trump, again, unfortunately, said that maybe he will not promise to keep this ceasefire, to keep this peaceful environment for a long time. This is the unfortunate thing in American and United States policy. He, I think, said for his near abroad, I again speak with maybe Russian terminology because Mr. Putin, I think, liked this near abroad terminology, but still, I think Mr. Trump and Putin had so similarities. Because for his near abroad, I mean, for Mexico, for Panama Canal, for the United States near abroad, Mr. Trump said, I think, some critical issues. But for the, I think, wider geography, he realized also that the United States had some minimal reaction, especially at that time of, I will call again, some postmodern diplomacy time, because everyone can know anything, I think, in 1 or 2 minutes, or maybe latest in 1 day. Diplomatic games change so easily at this time. For Israeli politicians, for Ukrainian politicians, even for Turkish and the Middle Eastern sides, we must think twice that diplomatic games change. And Mr. Trump, as a tradesman, again, he's a very successful tradesman. I always said this because as a tradesman, he also changed his position, I think, in a game principle. We also like this principle in Turkish diplomacy, or president says it always, because in this trade philosophy, I think this statesman, such trade statesman, really prefers such positioning, and they can change their positioning so easily, which diplomats cannot do so easily. I think diplomats, as your first question signifies, that doesn't like such changes. And as people, as politicians, as experts like valuable Mr. Spooner and you, Mr. Amashov, we must be also, I think, ready for some immediate changes at this time. And for Turkish diplomacy also, I realize that even in our foreign ministry, the things are not so like the things in 10 years ago times, or in 20 years ago. Many things change so easily, and diplomats are now preparing themselves for this new period.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Spooner, at the time when the United States is set to leave the Paris Agreement, it seems to be very clear that the United States will leave for the second time, with its carbon footprint likely to increase, which is already quite massive. China has been ramping up its renewable energy potential. We also know that Biden administration oversaw record levels of US fossil fuel production, despite the fact that the rhetoric-wise, the prioritization of climate policy was still there. And climate experts have long warned that additional extraction of oil and gas could potentially imperil the ability of the world to withstand against this climate change. So what I remember very vividly, actually, during COP29, during November in Baku, there was very interesting moment when the deal on NCQG was on the verge of collapse, and many people were making references to US Trump's presidency and the fact that the US would leave the Paris Agreement, saying that this would complicate the process of raising that required amount of money. And quite a number of experts were talking about Chinese leadership in green energy, and some of the figures emanating from a renewable energy sector indicate that China is going to ramp up its potential there. How would this, you think, impact US-China confrontation from that particular perspective?
Well, I believe that China is already, in fact, ramping up its investment in green energy. In fact, I read a statistic that last year it increased investment in that sector by around 11%. And I believe that there's always been a certain tension regarding commitments that sovereign countries have made to reduce their carbon footprint by 2030 or by 2050 or by 2060. In other words, achieving those goals has always seemed to be a bit in question. Is it going to be late? How late is it going to be? I mean, I think we see that all around the world if we look at the statistics and whether countries are on the right timeline in order to reach commitments that they have made about that. So that's an issue. Are countries actually going to fulfill that on time? China, I think, seems to have made a commitment that it will, and I agree with what you said about them taking the lead in green energy. I think it's clear that they're going to. It's certainly not going to be the United States, not now. President Trump's administration is going to be fast-tracking approval for oil production, for oil infrastructure projects. That's clear. And one key thing, if I might, when we talk about the energy transition, it's about switching from carbon-based fuel to electricity mainly. Now, that means certain critical minerals, rare earth minerals. China has been preparing for the primacy of rare earth minerals and other critical minerals for decades. I've read a statement even made by Deng Xiaoping about that. So China is ready to do that. And the fact is that today they already have an effective monopoly on the processing of rare earth metals. They also have significant production of their own. Now, I'm based in Astana in Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan has very significant rare earth metal reserves and other mineral reserves, copper, for instance, which is also crucial. Kazakhstan is working on attracting investment to develop the development of the rare earth minerals, and it's moving forward. Uzbekistan also has rare earth minerals, although the level of development is lagging behind. But the point is that if all those rare earth minerals get processed in China, then it's not that important where they're produced, because China is going to control how they're disposed of. That's a big issue. And Marco Rubio talked about that specifically in his address. So one reality that we have to face is that it's going to take a very concerted effort by other countries to even make a dent in China's leading position when it comes to rare earth minerals and the energy transition.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Demirtas, one of the key elements, components within the wider China-US confrontation seems to revolve around middle corridor, the corridor which is to connect China with via Central Asia with South Caucasus and Europe. And there seems to be a sensibility on the American side that middle corridor is a perfectly noble idea. Connecting Central Asia with Europe is essential. It's also within the American interest. American foreign policy seems to have predicated on the idea that the connection should not be via Russia or Iran, but the connection on the whole between Europe and Central Asia is absolutely vital. There is an interesting dichotomy as long as you look at Chinese and American position. China wants to be connected with Europe, and America does not want China to benefit from the middle corridor. What will be the role of Central Asia, you think, in the context of US-China confrontation from now on?
Yes, thank you. It is also another important dilemma maybe in Eurasian politics, because Eurasia has as the United States politicians and diplomats know, has so many faces, so many intersections, but also clashes of interests. We all know that. As Turkey, we realized that for maybe 1,000 years in maybe the residents of Anatolia, but before that, as you know, we all in the regions. And we realize that the actors, they are all defending their own interests, first of all. But United States, I think there are two sides, which, I mean, the United States diplomats must think, first of all, that China is the vital actor, especially in the wider Eurasian terms, for constructive diplomacy and for positive terms or for moderate agendas. We need such, Chinese efforts and Chinese initiatives, like these non-violent, actions, like non-violent diplomacy, I can call it, because we are sadly watching that states can be so violent. I mean, even the Western states, I am so sorry to telling that, but they are really respecting the old, I don't know, this modern maybe diplomacy, which is not anymore so modern. I mean, the 21st century humanitarian terms. Because we can understand that Chinese or Russian parties, and even Iran, they have some traditions in their own regions. They have also their own young politicians. We know that the state bureaucracies, the state systems are so different compared to the Western ideology. We all know that. But also, as I said, that digitalization and the new era makes some differences in those countries. When we think about middle corridor, first of all, the Central Asia, as you said, is the key region. starting from Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, till the Mongolia, even till the Japan. We can say that all the territory, and we said that in the Western till the London, we can say that all this wider Eurasian area will be affected positively. There are two corridors, as the United States diplomat said. The other one is the India corridor, as you know, as you may remember. This is another option to bypass Turkish Anatolian territory and also maybe Chinese and maybe Russian interest area. It will just go directly like a sea road. But the logical option, the logical selection, we build this middle corridor idea, and we hope that Mr. Trump's and his new cabinet, as Mr. Spooner said, that cabinet will also come and talk this with all the sides, all the partners, starting from China, of course, but the Central Asian and, of course, Caucasian partners will be ready, I think, to talk with them. Of course, Turkey is always ready. We are always in the middle. Unfortunately, it is disadvantageous sometimes, but mostly it is an advantageous position. We all know that. But regarding the crisis, I think we must come together. In the Democratic Party's rule in this last 4 years, I think in the dialogue, Mr. Biden is gone, but still, I think we must talk about this issue. But I think there is some problems about the dialogue in these last 4 years. And we must exceed these barriers of the dialogue problem in this new term.
Mr. Spooner, do you expect the re-emergence of what was once called Great War back in late 19th, early 20th century between the British Empire and Russia, this time in the shape of a long-term sort of confrontation between China and United States in Central Asia? And how do you evaluate the prospects of Central Asia plus model when it comes to Central Asia's and those 5 countries' cooperation with United States?
Well, I think if you look back to the beginning of C5+1, very important for Central Asia. We know that Central Asia has a multi-vector foreign policy originated in Kazakhstan, you could say, back in the early 90s. It's very important to them. They have to get along with people to their east and their west and their north and their south. As far as a new, confrontation in Central Asia between China and America, I agree with my colleague. That has to be avoided. The whole point of the middle corridor, really, is to connect China with Europe. And the United States has been very active in promoting the middle corridor. Yes, we're in favor of the middle corridor. This is important. That, of course, because it reduces the influence of Russia in the region. It's good to get necessary goods to Europe in another way. So the United States can hardly say we're all for the middle corridor, but at the meantime, we're going to be involved in a massive trade war with China. It just doesn't make sense. Something has to give. For Central Asia, it's very important that the middle corridor develop. It doesn't replace the northern route, but it is growing. I mean, I watch what's going on in Aktau, in Kazakhstan's Caspian Sea port. The cooperation that's going on right now between Aktau and Baku is very significant, and there's a lot happening. And there's a lot of investment coming from the Emirates and from Qatar. This is really, really important. Measures are being taken, specific measures to reduce these bottlenecks and delays when borders are crossed along the route of the middle corridor. It's all very real. It's growing. It's getting better. And it has to be about moving things first and foremost from China to the West. So this should be one area where at least China and the United States can say, well, we're both in favor of this. Maybe we can both agree on some other things too. Tariffs, of course, are going to be a big problem for China. The whole issue of the critical minerals is a big issue for America because America is way behind on that. Maybe that's another way that the two sides can make compromises and do things that help each other so that they can avoid such a bitter confrontation.
Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen. I'm very grateful to you for your detailed answers. Thank you very much indeed to both of you.
Thank you, Mr. Amashov. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. This is for Richard Spooner, member of the advisory board of Washington-based Caspian Policy Center, and Merit Demirtas, independent researcher and former Turkish diplomat. See you very soon indeed.